Hey everybody, I'm Greg Soul, and this is Why Am I, a podcast where I talk to interesting people and try and trace a path to where they find themselves today. My guest this go around is David George Gordon. So this fella comes from a time when people read magazines, which means he was able to travel the world writing for them. Sounds pretty dope. Somewhere in there, he captured a giant octopus, wrote field manuals on Bigfoot, and busks with his harmonica. Pretty wild and interesting there. But what he's really known for is teaching folks how to eat bugs. So I hope you enjoy this all over the place conversation with David. David, thank you for joining me in the fantasy restaurant today.
Hey, this is great to be here. And the food is fabulous.
Excellent. Well, we're gonna find out just how fabulous. So let me give the preamble, the spiel. So I am your waiter. I am Greg, and I'm here to make the meal as interesting as possible. So this restaurant might be a little bit unlike any you've been before, because this could be a meal that consists of something from your childhood, maybe something your mom made, your grandma made. Maybe this is something you bake today. Potentially it's from your favorite restaurant, or maybe from your favorite fantasy novel or movie. So no rhyme or reason, only has to make sense to you. Sound good?
Yeah, I like
Excellent.
it.
Excellent, sir. Well, let's start at the start. What are we going to have to drink?
Oh, I think what I'd like is a tall glass of bug juice.
Now,
Or Kool-Aid, whichever you have.
so bug juice? What does bug juice even mean?
Well, I think people at like summer camp, they would call the pitchers of Kool-Aid that they would bring out bug juice. That was just its name because nobody really knew what it was made from or what was in it.
90% sugar, I'm sure, and then some
Yeah, right.
artificial
That's right.
flavoring. And all right, so tall glass of
Yeah, and I don't think it was Gatorade, that's for sure.
yeah. All right. Do you want this with I'm picturing like a mason jar with ice in there. Does that sound acceptable? What are you thinking?
Yeah, that sounds fabulous.
You mentioned camp, so that's like what it's evoking in my head.
Yeah, right. I like it.
All right. So we got your drink started. What are we gonna do for your appetizer? What are you thinking?
Mmm, heavens. I really like these things. They're little grasshoppers from Mexico called chapulines. And they're perfect bar food. They go definitely well with the bug juice. And they're just little, small little grasshoppers. They're roasted and seasoned in Oaxaca, Mexico.
So when you say roasted and seasoned, are they kind of spicy? Do they have like chili powder on it? Like what is it?
Yeah, they're well, there's all different flavors, so-called, of these chapulines, depending on who's making them. But yeah, they're basically wild harvested grasshoppers. They're small, like about the size of a broken Cheeto, and they're pretty tasty. I really like them.
Pretty tasty. So I've had I think it was like dehydrated grasshoppers or crickets, and they were like barbecue flavored, but they were very crunchy and kind of dry. So is this more of like a dry experience, or like more moist, or like describe
Well,
this
I
to
would
me?
say I'm familiar with the ones you're talking about. Those are definitely roasted crickets. So it's almost like what they put a coffee roaster, put the crickets through the coffee roaster and desiccate them. But but chapulines are a little chewier,
Okay.
so I guess they're fresher. They haven't been processed as much. And I was just in Oaxaca. You could see whole mounds of them for sale at markets and things like that. So very popular and large operation, all wild harvested. So kind of amazing.
No, that's interesting. So they just go around gather them out of fields and stuff like that. There's not
Yeah, I
just like
think
a
they go
farm.
into cornfields and harvest what they can. It's actually a nice way of getting rid of agricultural pests without poisoning ourselves in the process.
That's just what I was thinking. Like it's a boon for both parties involved, right?
That's right. And it's also a delicacy. They would say it was a pre-Hispanic or pre-Columbian snack in that people were eating those thousands of years ago before the arrival of Europeans.
All right. For somebody that's never tasted one, what would you liken it to? If there is something else that's slightly akin to it, how would you describe that?
Well, I would say the seasoning is probably three quarters of the thrill of it all. And when you're talking about Oaxaca, Mexico, they're famous for their different mole sauces.
Oh, nice.
So a lot of the flavorings vary locally. I think I went last time I was in Oaxaca, I had like a sampling of six different flavors of mole. The most famous one is a chocolate mole. It's a mole negro, and you get that in the States at a lot of restaurants too.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I'm here in the
mostly,
South, so I'm accustomed to that.
yeah, most of what we're talking about is actually, like I said, it's the seasoning. Although the texture, just from having being a maniac and having washed off the seasoning and all that, just to see what they're like, they just have kind of a, I guess the best way to describe it is a nutty flavor.
Huh.
Yeah,
Interesting.
very interesting.
I'd give it a go. I'm just thinking that there's going to be a lot of people listening to this conversation that are going to struggle a bit. So I was because like I tried the crickets and I actually enjoyed them. Like I went through half the bag and I had both of my kids attempt it. Didn't work for either of them. My wife, I don't think I could even convince her to taste them. So it seems like it's
Ah,
kind of
yeah.
a uphill battle.
Well, I have to say that uphill battle. I mean, I wrote my Eat a Bug cookbook 20 some years ago, and I don't think things have changed that much. People basically, it's like you vote from your stomach, and people like stuff that their parents or their grandparents fed them, even if it was completely weird, pickled pig's feet, for example. It's a comfort food. And very few people in North America, have had that experience of being given bugs for a food from their relatives. So it's an unfamiliar territory for most people. And in all the years that I've been involved in the edible insect craze, I've not seen that attitude change much.
Mm.
People kind of, oh, just try it, but that's not going to work with most people. They'll say, I know, even those like energy bars that you wouldn't even know there was a bug in it if someone hadn't told you. I've never heard anyone say, wow, I can really taste the crickets in there. So, but I've also had people go, I know it's good for me, but I can't eat it because it's too weird or whatever. My stomach won't go for it. So
Mm. That's
that's an
interesting.
uphill. It is definitely an uphill battle, and from my experience, it's been going on for more than 20 some years.
Yeah, yeah. I this isn't necessarily the case for me, but I've heard the phrase before. You eat with your eyes first, and
Yeah, that's also true.
I've definitely found that to be true with some of the people in my house. It's like if it does not look appetizing, doesn't matter how good it tastes. Yeah, it's probably just not going to hit right.
Yeah, and like a grasshopper, it's like I can see its eyes or whatever. It's the whole thing. If you go to a Chinese restaurant and you order a whole fish and they bring that out, it's been masterfully created, but everyone sort of like stares at it until the waiter comes over and kind of cuts it up for you because we just don't know what to do with whole animals. That's really unfamiliar for the most part.
Hmm, I dig it. All right, so we're gonna have some chapulines for your appetizer. We tend to, at this point, there's that weird lull where the appetizers are gone and you're still waiting on your main dish. I like to call that the bread slash soup slash salad portion. So, are you
Yeah.
interested in any of that, all that? What are you thinking?
Well, I just came from a dinner at a really nice Italian restaurant in Tacoma, Washington, where I live, and we had minestrone as that soup in between time. So I'm going to say I'd like some of that as well, with or without bugs.
So, and I love minestrone too. So, with your minestrone, are you doing any kind of a bread? I usually like to have a
Yeah,
little
maybe a
something.
focaccia or something like that.
Yeah,
That'd be great.
a nice focaccia.
Gee, just thinking about this is making me hungry.
Yeah, I haven't eaten lunch yet, which
Yeah.
tends to be the mistake I make before I do that.
Well,
Sorry,
I
so
won't get too graphic on you then.
now go to town. Yeah,
Yeah.
do your worst. All right, so we're gonna do some minestrone and some focaccia. I love that. All right, so moving on to your main dish. What are you thinking?
Hmm. Well, I always have this game that I play with people. If you could have anything you wanted, for your birthday, or it's your birthday and you can have anything you want, what would it be? And I get all sorts of different reactions. My own personal one would be a lobster tail. So I'd love an Atlantic lobster tail.
All right. So I feel like lobsters are somewhat polarizing for people. I think you either absolutely love them or you don't want anything to do with them. What is it about it? Because I've also heard somebody say you don't necessarily like lobster, you like butter, and you're just
Yeah,
looking for
that's
an
true.
excuse to eat. But so are you heavy on the butter? Is that really you think the main appeal
Well,
for you?
I wouldn't say no, but I think basically what appeals to me is that lobsters are just giant bugs. They're, they're crustaceans, so they're actually not insects, but they're very similar in body parts and all that. And one time I had a guy tell me if insects were the size of pigs, damn straight we'd be eating them.
Well, yeah,
So, a lobster is pretty much a substantial meal. And if we could get grasshoppers to that size, we'd be eating them too, I'm sure.
yeah. I've heard before that yeah, like lobsters and shrimp have more in common with bugs than they do fish. So why do we
Yeah,
have
that's
such
right.
a strong aversion to
Well, it's funny too because people sometimes go, well, they're from the ocean. Like that makes a big difference whether they are harvested in saltwater or in on land.
gotcha.
But
Yeah.
so that's culturally justifiable to eat shrimp and lobster.
Yeah.
In fact, a lot of places they call lobster bugs. Let's go out and catch me some bugs, basically.
Yeah.
That's
Or
what scuba divers
crawfish around
do.
here. A lot of times you hear them called mud bugs.
Oh yeah, mud bugs. That's right. Where
Yeah.
are you, by the way?
I'm in Texas.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Definitely Louisiana. There's mud bug festivals and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty
I
common
like
from
them.
there. We got a lot of Cajun imports kind of around here, especially when you hit the coast. There's a lot of Louisiana folks that have made their way over here. All right, so we've
Yeah.
got lobster tail. What are we doing as the side to go along with your lobster?
Hmm. I think classically speaking, I would think of coleslaw would be a good one.
What is it about it you like coleslaw? Isn't that basically shredded cabbage with mayonnaise in it? Isn't that
Yeah,
coleslaw?
pretty much so. But it's I like any of the vitamin K vegetables. They're kind of bitter to our taste. So I think of ketchup. I think of coleslaw as being a great dish to accompany fried oysters, for example, or a barbecue of any kind. It just kind of goes there. I don't know what the deal is, but that's culture. A lot of our preferences are culturally linked, and that's one right there.
Yeah, yeah, coleslaw, potato salad, that's all barbecue fodder for us. That's pretty common.
I also wrote a book recently about oysters called Heaven on the Half Shell. And it had recipes in it. I think there are 20 different recipes put on it. One of the really old recipes refers to coleslaw as cold with a D, cold slaw. And somewhere along the line that changed into coleslaw. I'm not an etymologist, so I can't really tell you the history of that word. But that's kind of funny to me to see that was a thing so long ago.
Yeah, that feels correct. It feels correct because I just think of it as like cold cabbage with mayonnaise.
Yeah.
I'm not knocking it. I don't yuck on anybody's yum. It's just I don't know.
Well,
It's
yeah.
never. But maybe I haven't had the right one because all the ones I've
You
had
know,
have been pretty bland.
well, and I say you have to mix in some grated carrots as well.
Okay. Okay.
So, whatever.
Yeah.
We're talking comfort food here.
100%. I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
So we got a little bit of coleslaw to go along with it. All right. So arguably, and I mean, you can argue with it if you want. I'm still going to believe it to be true. This is the most important part of the meal, which is the dessert portion. So what do you get for dessert?
Ooh, man. So many choices out there. Well, I'm going to go back to my Italian restaurant experience and say tiramisu, which is, kind of typical wedding fare, wet dessert at a wedding, because everybody likes it. But it's basically a cake, very sweet, and it combines lots of different flavors. And I'm sure everyone has their own regional recipe, but that would be a good one for me.
All right. So the polarizing piece of tiramisu that I've found is some people like it wetter, where it gets a little bit mushier, and some people like it a little bit more firm. Where do you land?
Oh, I'm on the wetter side, definitely.
You want all of the juice. I get it.
That's right. All the good stuff.
Moist. All right. Well, you're gonna close it out with maybe a coffee or something like that. What are you thinking?
Oh yeah, definitely love a coffee. And I can drink coffee late at night and it doesn't keep me awake.
You're one of
So,
those crazies. How do you want it? You just want it straight black? You want some sugar?
oh, a little cream would be great. So
Coffee.
coffee with cream.
All right.
Thank you for asking.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Let me read back your order because
All
as I
right.
always tell people, I don't want the kitchen getting blamed for my mistakes. So let me make sure I get
Yeah,
it
yeah.
right. So we're gonna do a tall glass of bug juice. I'm thinking mason jar. I'm gonna do one of the fancy mason jars that has the handle baked into it.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Then we're gonna do
Nice.
some chapelinos. We're gonna have some minestrone as well as some focaccia to kind of help. That way you can scoop stuff onto the spoon a little bit better. I like
Yeah,
to two hand
that's
it when I'm
right.
doing that kind of thing. We're gonna go lobster tail and we're gonna have coleslaw. And we are also for dessert gonna have tiramisu with some coffee and cream. Does that sound correct?
That sounds fabulous.
That actually sounds like a terrific meal. I would
Yeah, I know.
genuinely give the run
I'd
at
like
this.
to I'd like to replicate that later today, but I don't think it's going to happen.
Sometimes it's a little bit more trouble than it's worth, but I
Yeah,
love
I
the
don't know
idea.
when the last time I had lobster tail was. I probably when I was in Boston years ago, and it was so expensive, I wound up sharing it with three other people. It was like a main course that we divided up and judiciously served to each other. And this was a bunch of bug eaters, so it seemed appropriate to be ordering the lobster tail. And we were also, in lobster capital Boston.
Yeah, when in
So
Rome. All
yeah,
right.
exactly.
Well, David, thank you for joining me in the fantasy restaurant.
There you go. I've been working on these, I don't know if you're familiar with this self-help book called The Artist's Way. It
Mm-mm.
was a big deal maybe 20 years ago, but in it, this person is talking about all these exercises you should do to get in touch with your inner artist. And one of them is writing morning pages, taking the earliest morning hours and just writing whatever comes into your mind for like, I don't know, multiple pages. I usually print out my writing just so it's be more legible. So it's slower for me, but I've been writing morning pages about my earliest career as a writer and about how things changed when I wrote the book, The Eat a Bug Cookbook. That was in 1998. So quite a while ago. But but it took me all over the place. I was on lots of TV shows, Conan O'Brien when he was still in New York, and later, more recently, James Corden's show, and I was on Barbara Walters' show, The View, and all this stuff. It suddenly became a big deal, and I basically spent about 20 years of my life doing cooking demonstrations, cooking with insects using recipes from my cookbook kind of as a great promotional ploy, but it also started paying good money. So I liked it. The amount of effort that went into writing a magazine story, I could basically make that same amount of money with a weekend of bug cooking. So, given the choice and time was money, I was going towards doing more cooking with insects than I was writing travel stories, which is what I used to do.
That's
And
interesting.
that's what I've been writing about is kind of like, here are my highlights. I went to Singapore, that kind of stuff. And it's been fun to be revisiting that because I haven't really been cooking with insects very much, well, in recent years, last couple of years. The book went out of print maybe 3 years ago.
Mm, Yeah, you had
A
a
long
pretty
run
good
for a
run of it then.
paperback. For a paperback, that's a long run. I mean, it was in print for 20 some years.
Yeah, that's
Two,
wild.
two different editions. I updated it at one point to make it look less comical and more foodie appropriate.
I did notice, yeah, like a shift in the covers because I think on some of the
Yeah.
early ones, it's like you with a pan, kind of at a an angle, and you're
Oh yeah, my pet tarantula spider is walking around in the pan. Unfortunately, tarantulas, particularly males, don't live that long, so I don't have a pet tarantula right now. But for many years, I had a pet tarantula um, named Doris, and then later named Wes after a friend of mine. So I've had two different ones.
what draws you to tarantulas, or is it just you enjoy bugs in general?
Well, you know what? Of all the things that I've been cooking, tarantulas probably rate up in the top 10 easily. And their legs are basically full of muscle. When we eat meat, we like muscle, basically, whether it's a chicken breast or a cow's or a, a steer's shoulder or what have you. That's muscle. So the muscle in a tarantula is mostly in its legs, not so much in its body itself. And I used to do cooking demos where I'd end up bringing uh, people aboard to sample the dishes. I could get 8 people on stage to each one have a leg. And generally speaking, people really had a good experience with it. So that was a trip.
Yeah, you know what's interesting is I don't know. I just never contemplated, I guess, or I don't remember anything from high school science. But you're talking about how spiders have muscles in their legs, and I would have never described it that way. It didn't even occur to me. Obviously, they're moving in some fashion. It's not magic, so it's got to be something in
Yeah,
there.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, and also the shock. I have to say, a lot of my motivation in working on the Eat a Bug cookbook was shock value. And, taking a whole tarantula, singeing off its body hairs with a Bic lighter or whatever, putting it in a tempura batter, and then deep frying it made great theater. And everybody in the audience is kind of cringing, except when they brought people up, who would like to try this? And then people were very enthusiastic because it was their one opportunity to try something really kind of like, Klingon inspired food.
yeah, very out there, very strange.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
So at any
interesting.
rate, I had that pet. I used to go to an event in Los Angeles just about every year or every other year. There was a giant insect fair in the Natural History Museum there. And there were all these vendors who were there, and some of them were selling little baby tarantula spiders that were, like the size of a dime. So I would oftentimes bring one home with me, and that's how they'd grow up into these over a year. They'd grow into adult-sized tarantulas. But they all started out as, oh, aren't they adorable little spiders?
I don't
Unless, of
think,
course,
as you say, most
unless you're
people probably
fearful.
aren't going to say adorable baby spiders. I genuinely have no problem with them. They don't bother
Yeah,
me, but
yeah,
I would say generally the vast majority. And actually, there's a place in Galveston, Texas, about 2 hours from me, where they have these big pyramids, and one of them is a rainforest pyramid. You go in there, and they have lots of animals. It's kind of an open sort of environment, but they do
yeah.
have some bugs and reptiles and stuff in there in their own little dedicated cages. And my favorite part is seeing the bugs. So they have some of these stick bugs from like South America and Africa
Oh,
that are
yeah.
just enormous, just the size of your hands, and they have some of the bird-eating Brazilian spiders,
Yeah,
tarantulas down there.
really.
Dude, it's almost like looking at aliens. Some of these creatures as
Yeah,
big
they
as they
are
are.
really strange. And also, where I live, it's right near I live in Tacoma, Washington, which is on Puget Sound. And there's an enormous bridge that goes across. It's almost like a little mini Golden Gate Bridge, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. And that's famous for having the world's largest octopus species that live in there. And that means they have arm spans of maybe 12 feet.
That's wild.
pretty big. I used to collect them because I worked at that time for the aquarium in Tacoma, Washington, and part of my job was to go out and collect octopuses. Now I look at that, there's all this research about how smart octopuses are. And now I sort of feel like I was a slave trader pulling them out of their homes and then putting them in a box and shipping them to another aquarium as part of a trade deal that we had set up to get fish or something. And, I don't look back at that with great pride. But I bring this up because I think, if anything, the cephalopods, octopuses and squids and nautiluses, they are definitely creatures from another world. It wouldn't surprise me if we figure out later on that they came here from another planet and crashed into the ocean and have been making a go of it all this time. Who knows?
That's interesting. How long were you at the aquarium?
Oh, I worked there just for a couple of years. Prior to that, I had worked at the aquarium in Chicago, the Shed Aquarium, which is a giant institution right on the Lake Michigan. And at the time, I just, I was in my 20s. I had wanderlust and I wanted to move somewhere closer to the ocean, which is how then I heard about this job in Tacoma and applied for it and got it. So, but you know what? Working at an aquarium was very different than my experiences working at an aquarium that was part of a zoo. And at the risk of sounding unappreciative, I realized that the larger animals, were not very happy living in captivity. An Arctic fox is not going to think that Tacoma, Washington is the tundra. And you could just look at them and see they were restless or sad or whatever. And that kind of got to me. Fish are easy to fool. That's what fishing is all about. If you carve a little something out of a plug out of wood and paint it green, then it looks like a frog and the fish will eat it. They're happy. In an aquarium in Chicago, we used to have fish, coral reef fish, that would eat the plastic coral, the replica corals that were in their tanks. They didn't seem to mind. They'd crunch it through just like it was a, calcium coral skeleton. So they were a lot easier to deal with. You were actually giving them a good break because they didn't have to be afraid of predators and things like that. So,
That's
but that
interesting.
didn't work for me in a zoo. So a couple of years and I was on to something else.
Well, what'd you move on to after the zoo, or rather
Well,
the
I'm
aquarium?
glad you asked that question.
Yeah.
I actually started writing then. I had already been dabbling at writing to some degree, but after I left the Point Defiance Aquarium, that was the name of the aquarium in Tacoma. It's still there. And I was on a hiring list for the aquarium in Seattle, Washington, which seemed to be a great opportunity. But despite the fact that I was ranked high in that application process, I just never got the job. There was always somebody who had been doing the job in an interim capacity as a volunteer, and it would be cruel not to give them the job. So
Mhm.
when jobs did come up, I was in second place all the time. So while I was doing that, I started writing stories about my experiences with ocean science, and that got me hooked. I realized I could have all the fun without pushing a broom, and I got pretty successful in selling stories to, at that time, a magazine called Oceans, which was the Oceanic Society's magazine, kind of a ritzy thing. And then I started writing for airlines magazines. Then I became a full-fledged travel writer. So all about writing for magazines. And eventually I started writing books. And the rest is history.
So
Or
you were
whatever. My brilliant career as a writer began then.
so were you
And we're talking about 1980, I think,
okay?
1982.
1980. So were you completely self-sufficient off of writing? Like you didn't have to pick up other jobs like that. You were just dedicated on writing?
Well, I often had part-time jobs just to make sure I could pay my utility bills and all. And so I was an editor for a crafts magazine, for example, but it was always part-time jobs. So I'd have really my real energy was going into writing query letters, which is, proposing a story to a magazine or whatever. and working my way up the food chain of who paid the best.
So how does that
Airlines
process work?
magazine.
Like you submit like, "Hey, I'm thinking about doing this thing," and they'll say, "Yeah, that sounds great," and they give you some upfront money or some stipend to do it. It's like, how do you have to self fund and then they pay you? How does that work?
Well, a little of both. It's like when I got started writing travel pieces, it was the first piece that I wrote of with any success was an article for a magazine called Travel Holiday Magazine. It was a big national
Hmm.
magazine. And I wrote a story about going on a tour sponsored by a zoo. And I had already gone on that tour. When I came back, I wrote a query letter to that magazine and they bought the story. Now, they didn't pay me for my travel at that time, but later on, once they knew who I was, I started getting assignments. At first, I thought they were all going to be like, would you write a story about Olympia or whatever? But actually, my first gigs were like, would you go to Indonesia? They looked at because I lived on the West Coast, the magazine was on the East Coast. So they figured going to Indonesia was closer for me. Still a really long airplane flight. And anyway, that kind of became my beat. I started writing stories about Southeast Asia. And they would pay for they'd make all the arrangements for the airfare and the hotels and things like that for those trips. But initially, for most people, I'd say it starts out with your footing the bill, having a great, I mean, people would say, well, that sounds great, but get in touch with us when you come back from the trip. So, yeah, initially it's a lot of your own personal outlay, and then hopefully it be turned into a better thing as time progressed.
Can you remember some of those first, like that Indonesian assignment? Was there like fear, anxiety? Were you just entire excitement? Like
Oh, no, I
what headspace?
totally love to travel, and I was always fascinated with Southeast Asia. I actually went on the trip I wrote about, the zoo sponsored trip that I went on, was while I still worked at the Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium. I was just about getting ready to leave, and I saw that a zoo was sponsoring a trip to Thailand to see elephants. And it was led by the elephant keepers from the zoo in Portland, Oregon, Washington Park Zoo, and it was awesome. I like became an elephant expert. It's like those ads you see in magazines. Learn to play the guitar in 6 days or whatever. Just on a trip for whatever it was, a week, escorted by experts. I became fascinated with elephants, and I wrote about elephants a lot and about that kind of a trip. So that was definitely a rewarding way to go.
That's cool. That's cool.
Yeah. So I was basically pre-adapted to be a travel writer. Unfortunately, I learned that if you really wanted to make a living as a travel writer, you needed to be on the road all the time. Like you couldn't have all this downtime. And at that time, I was a new parent. My daughter, who is now 37, was born, and I had a house and all that sort of stuff, was married, and going away on trips became more and more difficult. And the real action was at home anyway. So eventually, I also have to say a lot of my experiences are to a world that never exists. It doesn't exist anymore, like magazines, as opposed to writing columns for online magazines or whatever. And the economy of scale is very different. I used to make thousands of dollars for writing a travel magazine story, and now I'd say I could probably get hundreds of dollars for the same stories online.
Hmm.
So,
Do you do you feel like do you have like a sense of like nostalgia for that? Like that was the good old days, and we're going to a worse place, or do you feel like it's just a natural progression, kind of magazines going away? Well, I mean, I guess magazines and newspapers, right?
yeah, I think it's a natural progression, but I still like to read books, hard copy books. I don't like Kindle or those other opportunities to hear books. I just like holding a book in my hand, and even though the book smells good or whatever, so I kind of miss that about magazines and things like that. Airline magazines proved to be a great market. They paid really well. They had zillions of, copies that they would go on out for 1 month on an airlines. And I'd always get feedback from people. Hey, I was flying on Alaska Airlines and I read your article. Whereas some article, I wrote for This Old House magazine. I don't know anyone who read that article, even though it's a big story. So yeah, I do kind of long for the good old days of magazines, but oh well, progress is progress.
Yeah, it's so funny. Like as soon as you mentioned having physical books, it made me think of my wife. So when she gets junk mail, she'll open the ones up that are kind of akin to a magazine. She'll open it up, smell it, and then throw it in the trash, and then go to the
Yeah.
next one, give it a good sniff. It's so funny how like I've met many people now that is something that it's just I don't know. It's like a very much part of the experience for them as far as
Yeah,
like
we're
books
a
go.
very visceral people, and smells are kind of like a window. I can still smell what it was like to be in summer camp as a Boy Scout and spending the summer in kind of mildewy tents, canvas tents. If I smell that mildewy smell, I'm immediately transported back to summer camp.
Yeah.
So smell is one of those things that it's a real important touchstone for us. There's a
Hmm.
pun in there somewhere. But I've actually had people come up to me, my most recent book about oysters was printed overseas. It was done by University of Washington Press. And I've had people come up to me and go, I like the way your book smells. Doesn't a lot of books that are printed overseas smell funny. And this smells like a book. So go figure.
How interesting.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. Well, talking about writing, I was doing a little bit of perusing on some of your stuff, and again, I'm sure this is how a lot of people have found you, is you're writing on eating bugs and interesting things like that. But I also found how you're into like cryptozoology, or at least you've written a couple of books. So one on like Sasquatch and lake and sea monsters. So I'm curious where your fascination for that kind of thing came from.
Oh, that's a good question because way back when I was a travel writer, I wrote a story for that magazine Oceans, which was later picked up. It was about sea monsters of the Pacific Northwest. Anything living on the northern Pacific coast, along the coast, was in the article I wrote about, um, based on research someone had done up in Canada. Well, that article was picked up by Reader's Digest magazine. That's like one of the high points of my writing career because they just bought it. All I needed to do was a little fact checking. Where did you get this information kind of stuff? And I was getting paid, I think, $1,000 a page for that one story. So I remember coming back home from that Indonesia trip, stopping off midway in Hawaii where I could check my voicemail, and there was a editor from Reader's Digest asking if I was interested in selling that story. So I just remember that with great glee. That was definitely a home run for me. And but it also got me really interested in this whole notion of cryptozoology. For people who wouldn't know what we're talking about here, it's literally translates as the science of hidden animals. And things like the Loch Ness Monster or Bigfoot or all these other things. Ogopogo is a lake monster. All these things that people can't really tell if they're real or a collective hallucination or what. That falls into the realm of cryptozoology. So I just got fascinated with that. Like I think I said earlier, I was definitely in the writing in the realm of stuff that would rattle people's cages and get them to use their imagination more. So it was a great topic to get launched on. The one book that I've written most recently is called the Sasquatch Seeker's Field Manual, published by Mountaineers Books. And it literally is one of the few books that actually has been paying me royalties over the last several years. Because a lot of them barely earned back their advances. Even the Eat a Bug cookbook, which got me tons of publicity, and I did a lot of public appearances and kind of my joke is I took put my daughter through college by cooking grasshoppers. I mean, it was a good run, but this none of those books really paid back their advances. I found out after the fact that when they reprinted the Eat a Bug cookbook in the contract, I was responsible for paying the cost of the photos that went into the book, the food photos. So that was like $8,000, and I don't think I ever sold that many books to actually be earning back more than the initial advance.
Yikes.
So now that book, The Sasquatch Seeker's Guide, is everywhere. If I can go, I can walk 3 blocks from my house here in Tacoma and find stores carrying that book. So I definitely like that topic.
well, I have a couple of questions. One, what do you attribute its success to? Like, why do you think that's done so much better than some of these other ones?
Well, a lot of it comes down to the sheer mechanics of book publication and how good they are at publicizing and how big a distribution network. There's always this temptation for people to do self-publish books, but when it comes down to it, the reality is you wind up with a carton of books in the trunk of your car as you're driving from place to place trying to find homes for these books. And a good publisher like 10 Speed Press, who did the Eat a Bug cookbook, when that book launched, when it came out, I had like a list of maybe 8 or 9 different TV shows that wanted me on as a guest. And that was all through the publicity department of 10 Speed Press. So there's a real advantage to being connected up with good publicists. And apparently Mountaineers Books just has a really great distribution network. They mostly do hiking guides and things like that. This is a little departure for them, but their books are in all these national parks and outdoor centers and things like that, and then everywhere else, because Sasquatch or Bigfoot now, 2 names for the same thing, is kind of a trendy critter. I don't know what makes animals so charismatic, but Sasquatch would be high on that list of charismatic animals.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely is fun. And I've met a couple of people that are definitely believers that Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti, whatever you want to, like all the different
Yeah.
flavors, they believe that some form of those exist. And then I've met some people that absolutely believe that that's hogwash, right? Like it's not possible at all. And I'm curious, which camp do you fall in? Like, do you think
Well,
they're
I have
real,
to,
or are you just a collector of
yeah,
information?
I'm going to give you a somewhat of a cop out answer and say I would be a fence sitter. I could say it doesn't exist, but if someone goes out and finds a specimen of Sasquatch, then I'm wrong, right? So I'm not going to make go there. But my real claim, and I mentioned this in that book, I don't think the evidence that's been gathered will really holds up to scientific scrutiny. So the real thrust of my book, because I didn't want to just rehash stories about the Ape Creek incident or whatever that's already been written about a lot. I wanted to say how to get, if you actually heard or saw or smelled a creature like that, how would you gather evidence in a way that was credible and that you could recruit the help of scientists to resolve that? So most of it's about, you know, don't do dumb mistakes like lose custody of the evidence or things that don't write. My whole thing is really writing a log immediately after, kind of like the way they teach you in a you've had an auto accident, sit down and write down all the facts because you won't remember it the same way, a year or two later.
Hmm.
So most of it's about journaling, but really most of it is about just gathering evidence in a scientific way. It's actually a thing called citizen science, where they recruit people to gather evidence, bird watchers, for example, not just scientists, but they gather evidence in a way that can be used by scientists to There's a Cornell University does a project where people just write down what the action they're seeing at their backyard bird feeder. And if that's done by people all over the United States, that's really valuable information and can indicate trends. It was a great year for songbirds, but a terrible year for sparrows or whatever. They would be able to tell that from citizen gathered data.
Hmm. That's
So
interesting.
mine is Sasquatch meets citizen science.
Have you gotten any feedback from readers about, hey, here's the evidence I gathered using your methods?
I've gotten some, and you know what's funny? I think there are now groups that are pushing their existence around scientific investigations of Sasquatch that I think was inspired by that book.
Hmm.
So citizen science and Sasquatch is a more familiar thing. I also there's an organization in Washington State called Humanities Washington. And this is several years ago, but I was giving talks based around that book about the Sasquatch Seeker's Field Manual, uh, all over the place at libraries and other places that didn't really have budgets for bringing in speakers. But through Humanities Washington, they would pay me for the giving talks.
Hmm.
Over the course of about 2 years, I was all over the state of Washington giving these talks. I actually learned later that I was the record holder for the most requested topic. And they had all these other speakers who were going around talking about civil rights or Native American issues or you name it, all sorts of topics. But the Sasquatch one definitely drew crowds. And I heard lots of eyewitness testimony just at those giving those talks. At the end, I say, does anyone have something they would like to share? I'd get like it was like going to an AA meeting. I'd get people who would say, "Well, I haven't really told this story before," or "This is what happened to me when I was a little kid," or you could tell right away if they were sincere and genuine, or if they had been telling the story a lot to get attention. And sometimes there'd be five convincing stories in one talk.
That's
So I kind of
interesting.
based on the eyewitness reports, that's the strongest evidence we have right now.
Are you? And I know you're probably not writing down everybody's story, but I'm curious if you noted any trends or patterns, like any kind of consistencies amongst the stories, like things that were pretty common.
It's interesting because one there are like two different tracks that those stories would go down. One of them was these are scary beings that are going to rip you out of your tent and eat you.
Oh,
And the other ones are no, these are benign, almost uh empathetic creatures. And they basically live at peace with nature and all this stuff. They're kind of reverential. A couple of times I've had people say, I was sitting in the back of my pickup truck in the middle of the woods, and my mother had just passed away. So I was crying. I was overcome with emotion. And then this thing came out of the woods and like started moving towards me, like to comfort me. So I've heard that story a bunch of times. At one time, two different people told that same story in a row. The third person then raised their hand and said, "You guys are nuts. He didn't want to comfort you. He wanted to eat you." And the mood in that room just went from to ooh.
that's what I was thinking. You're making injured animal sounds outside. It's probably
Yeah,
coming to
yeah.
investigate a snack. Yeah,
Well, I've had dogs do that when I've been crying. That's
yeah,
they just pick up on those vibes.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
But at any rate, that's the two perspectives. One is that it's a monster from the woods, and there's a lot of movies that kind of go that way. Then there's Harry and the Hendersons, which is an old
Yeah,
movie where Harry is probably the most benign and understanding being in that whole movie.
that's interesting. Like, you've just taken me a direction that I would have never anticipated by talking about like cryptids. Is that in a time of need, here's some thing that can give you some peace, some solace. Because I'm assuming in those moments they felt some comfort
Yeah,
by
that's
assuming this this creature coming towards them was there to comfort them. No.
Yeah. Well, also there's a lot of people who I've had people come up to me and say, "Have you ever noticed that Sasquatch sightings and UFO sightings coincide?"
Hmm.
And I was like, I don't think I've really noticed that, but tell me more. Any rate, there are a lot of people that believe that these are beings from another reality. Yeah, another time and place. They're time travelers, or they came from another planet, or they're just not really, they're spirit animals. That's what most Native Americans would tell you, that they are not biological creatures, they're spirit creatures.
That's fascinating. You know, because it's so funny that you say the spirit animals. Because when you were talking about this, it reminded me. I talked to some ghost hunters one time,
Hmm.
and the idea, because everybody's got a different interpretation of what a ghost is, like what its purpose is,
Yeah,
why they're here, do they actually exist? You know, there's so many shades of gray associated with that, right? And the way you were talking about it really made me think about that, especially when you're talking about at the end of the thing. Hey, has anybody seen any cryptids? Well, if you ask that same thing in a room full of people and you say, hey, has anybody seen any ghosts? You're gonna get some interesting stories. You
yeah, I
know,
bet.
there's gonna be a handful of people that will stand up and I've heard some people say that, you know, it's a being coming to comfort me. You know, it's a loved one that's passed and seeking closure so that I can feel better, right? You know, like in
Mm.
those scenarios. And then I've heard people say that it's not a benign being. It's absolutely here to harm you. It's some kind of evil spirit, you know, coming
Yeah,
to. So it's funny that I didn't realize there was going to be so much overlap there.
yeah, that is interesting. It's interesting to me if you believe this is a biological creature that's like 8 to 10 feet tall and walks around in the woods, why aren't we finding its poop? You would think that would be everywhere. And then or for that matter, people are always going, well, why don't we find its bones of dead ones? And there's a lot of people who would counter that by saying, well, you hardly ever find bones of bears because they crawl into caves to die. So you're not going to find a dead bear just lying out, decomposing out in plain sight. But I don't know about. I'm sort of become famous for where's the poop. You would think that would be an easy thing to locate. And actually, I did find one article that was analyzing some excrement that had parasites in it that were not familiar to the people who were doing the research. This is something that was living on something that we don't know about. So there may be some evidence, but like I said at the very beginning, none of this evidence is something I want to go to court with because
Yeah,
it's easy to poke holes in.
yeah,
Even
yeah.
the very famous film footage, I'm sure we've all seen black and white footage of Sasquatch walk. It's like a minute's worth of film clip from Northern California in the 60s. People are still analyzing that and going, well, if it's a man in a suit, we haven't yet found the zipper. That's like the strongest affirmation of that. But there's lots of reasons to think it was a hoax. If nothing else, because they don't have anything other than that piece of footage. They don't have any of the leader, or they don't have any information on where it was developed or even when it was developed,
Mm.
which would normally be on the leader of the film.
Yeah, I've seen some of
There's a
that
lot of
film,
myths
like Image
around there.
Stabilized, where they stabilized the creature
Yeah,
walking through it, and it looks very like, I don't know. It's very different when you see it stabilized and it's just moving like kind of normally. It doesn't
yeah.
seem like a. It seems more like a guy in a suit, but
Well, and you know what? The guys who took that film footage were using a rented camera, and they didn't note what speed it was filmed at. So if you watch it at one speed, it's like a Charlie Chaplin herky jerky thing. And if you watch it at another speed, it's kind of smooth.
yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
I love the idea of this stuff. I never poo poo it, no matter what kind of interesting thing somebody believes, because it One, it's not my place to take that away from them because, as you said, somebody could have some kind of emotional connection to it. Like it's a thing that happened in a time when
Yeah.
they needed it most, and I would never want to take that from them. But also, I kind of like the idea of living in a world that's a little bit more magical than
Amen.
than I can perceive.
I totally agree with that. In fact, I think mystery is something we all crave now. We live in the information age where you can grab your cell phone and find out who is the supporting actress in a movie from 1930. You can just get that off of the internet. But there are things that we can't easily explain, and I think we just crave mystery. That's where it's really at for me. I did a lot of research right before the pandemic. I was going to revisit this topic of sea monsters, and I had a really good time with that prior to the pandemic. It was, for me at the time, it was an excuse to go up into Canada, British Columbia, and visit places that had history, sea monster history. So it got me around a lot, which was a lot of fun. Um, but then the pandemic hit. I couldn't even travel to Canada,
Hmm.
and that was kind of a bummer. In the meantime, I connected up with a Native American fellow who had seen a lake monster in eastern Washington, and he told me all sorts of mystical stuff about Native Americans. And my own experience in the past is that, I'm a white non-Native American, and I've been kind of discounted as this guy who wants to get in on the good stuff. And my most encounters with Native Americans, with few exceptions, have been more yep and nope kind of things, where I'm asking questions and they're saying nope, yep.
Hmm.
They're not talkative. Well, this guy was very talkative and told me all about rites and rituals and things like that. I was really interested in his take. He told me a lot of stuff I haven't seen written already in books. But then some way during that pandemic, I lost touch with him. And now I'm not able to reach him for further stuff as much as I'd like to. So that kind of killed my direction because I wanted to put something in that book that was not already written up in lots of other books out there. And I thought that a whole Native American concept of what is spirit animals was worth investigating further. So I'm still looking for that connection. And I may resume that book. I'm not really sure. Right now I have like a milk carton crate full of articles in neatly in file folders from that expiration. It's in my garage.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Something you said, you're talking about craving mystery and how we have kind of the world's information at our hand. It made me think, like, what's your relationship with technology and like your iPhone in general? Are you one of these folks that's like trying to reconnect with a time before you had all that available? Because I know that's something I'm actively attempting to do, is like utilize my phone less. And so what I do is I always have a deck of cards with me. So when that urge to, I don't know, stimulate my brain in some way comes, and like I want to look at my phone, I instead I pivot and I go over there and just.
Wow, that's a good idea. I had kind of in that same category that you're describing, because, for example, I bought a wristwatch so I wouldn't have to look at my phone all the time to see what time it was. I don't like the idea of becoming more and more dependent on whatever we're going to call it, artificial intelligence, which in itself says something. I don't want artificial intelligence. I want real intelligence.
Actual intelligence, yeah.
Yeah. But all of that stuff, I think, is got its uses, but I don't want to become an obsessive user. And it's easy to do that. I mean, believe it or not, I actually met my wife through an online dating service. This is 18 years ago. So we are both pioneers on that. But I was kind of obsessed with that too. I was probably over the course of 5 years, I would meet somebody I really thought we were getting along. Eventually we'd break up or whatever. I'd get off of the dating service. This is ridiculous. Why am I doing this? And then I was like compulsive to get back onto the dating service. So over the course of 5 years, I'd been on and off that site, Match.com. for a long time. Meanwhile, the woman I'm currently married to, was had a trial membership for 3 days, sent me a little wink, which you could do. So like, hey, I'm over here. And we had a date and connected, and love at first sight for me.
Hmm.
So how can I bad rap that opportunity? It saved me years of stumbling around going to bars and wondering, gee, that person looks interesting. Are
Yeah.
they available? So, but
Yeah.
generally speaking, I don't want to become an obsessive anything. And it's easy for me. I have kind of an addictive personality. If I have a donut 3 times in a row, that seems like this morning ritual. Get up, go get a donut, so I don't need that more addictions.
Well, down here in Texas, so I live in College Station, Texas, next to Texas A&M University,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they don't have addictions down here. They have traditions, is what we call it.
Mm-hmm.
So everything's a tradition. It may not be healthy, it may not be good for
Yeah.
you or anybody else, but it's a tradition. Let's keep doing it, folks. Yeah.
Hey, if you live in Texas and if you live near Texas A&M, I'm friends with 2 women. They're called the Bug Chicks,
The bug chicks.
and they are graduates of Texas A&M. I'm not really even sure where they currently live. For a while, they were living in Portland, but I'm sure you can find them online because they're a a presence, and they're fascinating people. They would make a really great "How did you get to become who you are today?" interviews.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think we've beat to death your writing stuff, but I believe you're also a musician, are you not?
That's right. I learned to play the harmonica when I lived in Chicago at age 14.
As one does.
What's that?
As a typical 14-year-old does. You just pick up and
Yeah,
learn
I
how.
wanted to be popular, which I think is a
And you thought
great
the harmonica's
motivation.
my ticket to popularity?
Yeah, well, first I wanted to learn to play the banjo because this was during the folk music era. This is kind of
Okay.
Beatles.
Okay.
But when we looked for banjos, they were really expensive. My mom copped out on me and said, I don't think we should get one right now. And somewhere, I think I was a freshman in high school, the place where I changed at bus stops to get to school, there was a little store selling Hohner harmonicas for like $5 or $6. Now they're way more expensive. But anyway, I bought one and I started. The first song I learned to play, because there were instructions in this harmonica made in Germany. The first song I learned was Auch du lieber Augenstein. That song.
Okay.
And I wanted to learn Love Me Do by the Beatles. Wah, 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 da, da, da. So, so I pushed on, and it took me about a year to get self-taught to play anything on the harmonica. And now, many, many years later, I'm pretty darn good at it, and I really enjoy it. So, I'm putting most of my energy now into being a busker, performing on street corners
No way.
with other musicians, and just having way more fun with that than suffering around with book projects.
That's cool. That's cool. So, are you more like jazz or maybe blues? Because that's usually what
Well,
I think of when I think of
I
harmonica.
started with Chicago blues.
Okay.
That was my wannabe. I loved Muddy Waters and all those Chicago musicians, and who had great harmonica players working with them. But nowadays, I pretty much play what I want to play. I've kind of gotten to that level of mastery, so I can play old 1920s jazz kind of pieces and Lady Be Good and Don't Get Around Much Anymore and songs like that. And I like a diversity of being able to play all different kinds of stuff, not just the blues.
So, when you're out busking, are you by yourself? Do you have a few fellas with you?
Well, I started out with my wife, who plays ukulele really well, and myself. She's currently going through a thing with her wrist.
Hmm.
If she uses her wrist too much, it hurts.
Hmm.
So she's not playing with me as much as she was. But I've since been doing a regular Saturday get together at a coffee place with other friends, and maybe 5 different guitarists will show up. and we just all play stuff together. And that's a mix of everything. Anybody wants to play Springsteen or Chicago blues or you name it, we're on it. So that's been a lot of fun and great reward.
So is this something you did when you were young, and then like the travel days and all the magazine days, you weren't necessarily doing it? You've picked it up kind of a little bit later here, or have you kind of always been doing it?
I think I've kind of always been doing it, but putting it second stage to my writing. And so, I'm a writer, but I also play music. Now I'm a street busker, period. Because I like it more. If I put the same amount of energy into my music as I did into trying to sell a book, definitely get somewhere. And as it turns out, like, I have a lot of friends who have albums that I'm playing on. So there's some really good stuff. There's my stepdaughter, Karen's youngest child, plays the cello in a group called OK Carol. So if you look at them up on, I don't know, Spotify or any of those music sites, OK Carol, like OK Corral, only Carol, like the name. I have a couple of pieces on their stuff that I really like a lot.
That's cool. Well, what's next for you? It sounds like you've conquered pretty much everything. You gonna start making movies, or?
Well, some of it is revisit. As soon as I said I'm done with writing, I came up with three different ideas. And I'll share one of them with you because I think it's definitely up your alley. It's kind of building off of the Eat a Bug cookbook idea, only this is a cookbook using foods that aren't really foods, but people eat them anyway, like pencil erasers or Play-Doh
Like,
or library paste or any of this stuff. Take six number three pencils, cut the erasers off of them, and put that in a food processor and lightly process. It would be that kind of a book. I was telling this story to my granddaughter, who is a 13-year-old, and she said, "Oh, you have to have a chapter on snot."
oh, dude, this
Like,
sounds like, what do you call
wow.
it? Is it pica? Is that what you call it when people like have these compulsions to eat odd things like drywall dust or
Yeah, I
couch
don't really
cushions?
know. I do know that I went at one time. I went to this place in Philadelphia called the Mutter Museum, and it's a museum of medical anomalies. So they have like preserved specimens of Siamese twins, and it actually was starting to make me sick to my stomach to be in this museum for too long. But in as part of that museum, they have a case of all the stuff that was removed by a surgeon from people's stomachs
Mm.
after they accidentally swallowed them. So there are a lot of like collar buttons and little pieces of metal and stuff like that. And when I was looking at that, I was like, there's a restaurant menu in here somewhere. This is stuff that won't kill you, but we don't recommend that you eat it too often.
Yeah.
Collar buttons.
My initial reaction was to say that almost sounds like a children's book. But then I was thinking that might actually encourage little kids to start eating all the bizarre things around them. So maybe it's not such a good
Well, and
idea.
where my mind is at, I'm kind of right into writing children's books for adults. And that's almost a genre in itself. That there's lots of Edward Gorey type books that are hypothetically kids' books, but are definitely aimed at adult humor.
Yeah. You know what's funny as you say that is I was having a conversation with my wife and our friends for New Year's. We were hanging out, and I was saying that, a lot of my joy lately has been coming from being a kid. So just
Mm,
doing kid stuff, doing the stuff I did
yeah.
when I was a child, like going to arcades or, just going in and hanging out at the beach. Like, so much of my pleasure now is derived from just being a kid. So the idea of like a children's book made for adults actually kind of appeals to me right now in this phase of life I find myself in.
Yeah. What's funny is that the publisher, the 10 Speed Press, published the Eat a Bug cookbook way back in 1998. They had also published the book I wrote before that called The Complete Cockroach, that was all about cockroaches. Well, nowadays, I don't think they would have touched either of those books because now they do really elegant cooking books, mostly the restaurant chef, the complete so and so's recipe book or whatever. and they're very elegant and upscale and aimed at their target audience, which is foodies.
Hmm.
So they used to do things like how to exercise with your cat, stuff like that. And I don't think they would have bought either of those books nowadays. So I'm gonna have to find myself a new publisher for the whatever it is book that I have in my mind.
Hmm. I dig it.
First, I better get more recipes. I remember when I wrote the Eat a Bug cookbook, the first thing they asked me is, "Do you have proof that you have 25 recipes?" So that's that, because that's the minimum we can build a book around.
Gotcha. Interesting. Well, you're gonna have to. Yeah. It sounds like you got your work cut up, and I want to see. Are you actually gonna attempt these recipes? Or are you just gonna
I'm not
invent them?
really sure. I haven't gotten that far in my thinking. Although the one for I kind of wrote a sample of a recipe, haven't tried it for using pencil erasers. My grandchild, the same one who came up with the chapter on snot, also said that for a while it was hard in her house to find pencils that still had uneaten erasers on them. So
Or unchewed pen caps.
he
That's
might
another
be the
one.
target audience for this book. We don't know.
Yeah, for sure. All right, David. Well, I tell you what, we are coming to the end of our conversation. Again, thank you for the gift of your time. I really appreciate you. I want to give you an opportunity for you to shout out anything you're interested in that you want people to go and check out. How would you have people interface with you? Any, I don't know, any socials, anything like that? Like, what are you interested in there?
Well, I guess I'm going to promote my own musical brilliant career. I was in big quotation marks there. Um, because I used to play in a band. I love this name, Quasimodo and the Bell Ringers. You know, who would have thought? And the main character in this band was a woman poet. She's older than me. So the beat poets, Jack Kerouac and people like that were her contemporaries. And she would read poems, and musicians and I would play music behind her. And that band in the town of Port Townsend, where I lived at the time, was wildly popular. If we did a show, it would be a sold out crowd every time. Now she's no longer alive,
Mm.
but she was a hunchback. So she used to write poems in which she referred to herself as Quasimodo. And we eventually became Quasimodo and the Bell Ringers. So I would say if you can find recordings of that band, I would say go for it. The other one, I was in a band called God's Favorite Beefcake. And I think you can find them on Bandcamp. But that was a really great band named after an article someone had written about a Mormon calendar of men, with their shirts off. Mormon, and someone writing the article said something about God's favorite beefcake, and the guy I knew at the time said, "There's a great name for a band," and created this it was almost a punk, folky band. It was like a jug band. It was an eccentric band, and I just love that band and think about them all the time. So I would encourage people to track down God's favorite beefcake. There are videos on YouTube that you can find, and you can also find links to the songs that we did because we recorded 2 albums together.
All right, excellent. Well,
That's my plug for today.
I'll dig it. I'll make sure that we've got links to all that stuff. So
Oh,
again,
great.
David, I appreciate you, and I'm gonna hit stop on these recordings real quick.
Okay, well, I'm going to have to like
Recording stopped.
They always say in Chinese food, it's good manners to burp. So after that lovely lobster tail, I feel like I need to burp here. There. All right. Thank you very much. It's really been a pleasure talking with you.